Hello and welcome to New York Empire Podcast. I'm Dan Hilton. He's Matt Pippin, Auletta. And Matt, the season is officially on. We are now in the thick of it. We're now in the heat of it. The Empire, more importantly for our purposes and the conversation we're about to have, are 2-3, coming off one overtime and one double overtime loss on the road to Boston and Montreal. So we have a lot to talk about. You were on the team the last time the team did not make the playoffs back in 2017. And due to a weekend when they had no Jack Williams and no Antoine Davis, again, they were staring down the barrel of their first losing record. And I didn't want to go back in the records that far. So I'm assuming something similar to 2017, but again, still only one game under 500. And when you look at the rest of the East Division, that's where the calma comes in, because it is a muddy scene with basically it's the Boston Glory up top on everyone likely to get the 1 seed. At least they have the inside track unless something goes wrong. And then it's pretty much everyone else in a mix, with Toronto with some work to do at 0-3 at the bottom. So before we get into the nitty gritty, because we are going to recap these two games, I'm going to hit you with my hot take right at the start of the show. And you can tell me I'm crazy or not, whatever it is. Having watched the two games this season, the reason why I think I remain calm with a 2-3 Empire, and I know, yes, you have to win the games to make those numbers add up, and the win column has to go up or they want to make the playoffs. But this Empire team this weekend made me believe, without Jack and Twan, that even more so that they can win the whole thing, but only if they make the playoffs at all, which is such an odd statement to say. But at the level they played at this weekend, thinking about last championship weekend with that Minnesota won, if they play at that level, and I know they lost 2 games, but if they play at that level, they can win the whole thing. But they can't win the whole thing, obviously, if they don't make the playoffs, which is still very possible based on the fact that they lost those games, right? And I know it sounds like I'm watering down my take, but that's my hot take, that they look really, really good for a team that may not make the playoffs at all, just because the win column may not add up to enough.
So I'm with you 100%. I don't know if you can believe that. My take was going to be, I've been with the team every year in some capacity, except for the very first season. I played for 6 years and now, covered broadcast booth, sideline stuff, hanging out. We do this, watch all the games, whatever. This weekend that just passed was definitely probably the biggest bummer of a weekend, just like a bummer, because they were basically so close to just having everything go where it needed to be, and near the top of the standings, and they just, now that's not, and it's time to really dig in and fight to make sure you make the playoffs. But I mostly have good things to say about the team. A few things here and there I want to touch on that could be improvement or personnel decisions, stuff like that, but I have a lot of good things that I'm gonna say. So it shouldn't be all doom and gloom, even though it was just a bummer. There were obviously some weekends in years past where you get eliminated, and obviously that's as bad as it gets. It's a big bummer. But in terms of regular season, just absolute bummer of a weekend, this was a bummer. But I think they're okay.
Yeah, and that's how my notes are too. It jumps back and forth between positive, negative. And anything, I felt like a bunch of players from that home game against Montreal that they won played better over the weekend than they did in that game. Like Benyat, I'm going to start with Benyat, because I thought this weekend Benyat made basically every play that he was asked to make, and he made very few mistakes. I think he had 2 turnovers, I believe, against Boston or was it Montreal? And anyway, Benyat was clean. I thought Matt Labar very much bounced back after a really tough game at home against Montreal and
Top
looked
notch.
much better. Exactly. And I thought some of the connections with Calvin Brown in the backfield with Saul, that looked good as well. And yet I have in my notes that, Calvin Brown, I think his weekend, if anything, epitomized what this high ceiling yet kind of not high enough floor that this Empire team has. Because Calvin Brown, that throw to Shapiro against Boston in the third quarter was one of the best throws that I've seen in some time.
I was going to say that. It was wild. It was just, I watched it and then I rewatched it and I rewatched it and I rewatched it. I just kept thinking this is a buzzer beater that never really went above chin height. No one could get to it. It was just perfect through the field, and it was released at a slightly odd angle, and I just kept watching it. It was beautiful.
But let me hit you with the butt, because Calvin Brown, yes, he is that game-breaking thrower that we wanted him to be for the New York Empire. But he had 2 costly turnovers late against Montreal. And it seems like the turnovers, they're just too many at the wrong time for Calvin Brown.
he
And
threw them out of that game. Unfortunately, he had an awesome weekend.
Montreal. Yep.
Yeah, against Montreal, he threw them out of the game at the very end. He had an awesome weekend. He did a ton of great things, and then unfortunately, he rushed the one that would have just been the easy goal line thing. He turfed, and then yeah, there were just a few too many mistakes. On occasion, a huck that didn't really need to go, or it was kind of in coverage. It could be a little better. It just, yeah, he kind of killed them at the end when they could have just maintained some possession, taking it easy. I mean, they had Montreal where they wanted them for a bit, and they just let them get back into that game.
Yeah, let's do Boston first, because to set it up, 1918 overtime loss to Boston. One of the, we'll say, headlines from that game that might get forgotten is the pickup of Tristan Yarder, who is now with the New York Empire this season. He graduated from Pittsburgh. He is now back in the New York area. Remember, you played with him in 2019.
I
You won a
did,
title
yeah.
with him. He was a babyface. Well, he's still babyface, but now he just broader shoulders and a more refined player, and he's being added to that D line. And I thought he was really important in that D line. I know that the big highlight is he and Ben Simmons, two young defenders, getting skied by Jeff Babbitt, but Tristan Yarder just adds so much athleticism to that D line that does look more athletic than it did last season. Jacob Cowan and Oliver Fay, they certainly look bigger, and yet as big as they were, I would say all weekend too, Oliver Fay, and we're going to get to him in Montreal. I'm not going to talk about the offense part, but defensively, Oliver Fay, you know, that being even New York, did not really make too many mistakes in the air, and he won a lot of those 50-50s. And yet, in the Boston game, this was a surprise. And the Empire was still with them when Boston made almost every, at least to my calculation, 50-50 ball. How many times did Tober DeCrona go up in a way that is just unnatural? And it's one of those where you don't blame defense. You just tip your hat and say, yeah, I mean, if you're going to make those incredible plays. And then he had the other insane ones that were too insane. Maybe they weren't real, like the layout in the fourth, where was that actually possession, right? Was it not? If you go with it, that's fine. But they won, that being Boston, every one of those 50-50s throughout that entire game, with the exception of the one that heads to overtime, because to set all things up, I thought Tanner Johnson-Grow, also mentioned here, that he was so important with his pulls for Boston, as well as getting some Ds. And we're seeing the best version, I think, of Tanner Johnson-Go that we've seen in the league so far. But I said all the bounce back performances from the Empire. Max Shepard was really the only member of the O-line that looked a little out of sorts against Boston, and I'd have to rewatch the game for a third time to kind of get a good idea of why that may have been, or whatever that is. He then moved to the D-line against Montreal. We'll talk about that. But to set up the rest of that game, so here's the finale. Empire came back, I should say, from down 4 in the last 8 minutes of the game. There were Ds by Auletta, by Marquez, and a late yacht D on an unnecessary huck by the Corona for Cable. So that didn't need to happen for them. So it was one of their rare mistakes in the game. And then on the break chance, Agami Contreras, a huge layout to keep possession. I want to mention that. And then an injury timeout, and then a real timeout put the Empire O back on the field. And John Randolph, who played both sides of the disc, you can see that they are going to ride the 6-year-old pretty hard on both sides of the disc when necessary. And then the Empire scored with 13 seconds left. And then heading to overtime, Babbitt wanted a foul on the play. Refs disagree, because I think that was about the same level of physicality we've seen the whole game. And then we head to overtime, and the stats at that point were pretty even. Both had completed 7 hucks, 7 of 10 and 7 of 11, and 12 turnovers each. So it was a very tight game. And then the big question, that the reason why we had this show, was Solomon Rice-Bailey fouled by Tyler Chan with 10 seconds left in overtime? Because that was the game. Because then Boston, they had possession, they could just throw it away. But if the Empire was still on the field with 10 seconds left to go with their offense, they had at least 2 more throws to potentially send that game to double overtime.
Yeah, that was 100% a foul. And hearing the audio from the officials talking about how they thought it was incidental contact, I just don't see how that's a thing. I mean, you could say if the official only saw from like waist up and he came through, maybe their arms were close to each other, whatever, but Saul's arms are still getting like pushed pretty far out of the way. But whatever, close play, I'll give you that. When you look at the way his lower body slung out from under him, I mean, clearly his legs got clipped, or one of his legs or his hip or something. I mean, his one leg was like coming up all the way. I mean, he just got bodied right through. That was not a clean play. It was great anticipation by Tyler Chan, but it was a foul. I mean, good play, foul. Sometimes that happens. It can be both. Evan Lepler might have actually said that on the broadcast. It can be both. It can be great anticipation and a foul, 100% a foul. And for the officials to just botch that so badly at the end of the game, and then to just have the clock just run out after such an exciting game really plays into what I said earlier. Just an absolute bummer. I'd rather New York lose on a buzzer beater that doesn't go. I'd rather have Boston get a D. I'd rather go to double overtime and still lose. Just anything other than that. The officials just put that in their own hands and made what I felt like was very much the wrong call.
Yeah,
And
and that's why I said that
you can't blame the whole game on that. Both
right.
teams had chances to win by more or less than that earlier, but just for what it was in that moment, absolute bummer.
Yeah, and to that point, it said the refs at the end of to send it to overtime, they didn't call the foul on Babbitt. They called the Corona up. So it's like these, not to defend the refs, but there are a lot of bang bang moments in a game so tight. There's so often. I mean, you've played so many games, right? How many times do you feel like the referees truly affect the end result of a game? Right? It's one out of every. I don't want to take limits, but 8 or 10 games, right? Where the refs. I mean, when the Empire obviously were winning as much as they were by those margins. Like when you win by 8, the refs don't play a factor. But I mean, how many 2 to 3 point losses or wins do the refs truly affect? I would again say 1 out of every 8 or 9. And I felt like, yeah, 50% of this, the refs did play a hand in how this game ended. But yeah, I mean, it was a back and forth game. But as I said, I come into that saying, all right, Boston, I guess the East goes through them. That is kind of what we figured out this weekend. But for the Empire, if they are going to get into the postseason, this is certainly a team, again, with Jack and with Twan, adding those two back. Because as much as Boston have all their talent, this was their team. We saw their team this weekend. And Peter Borth is really, to my understanding, one of the only players that they'll be adding back into the fray. And the Empire, again, have Jack and Twan to add to that. So I'm happy with that.
It's still early in the season too, right? This Boston team, sure, maybe they'll make adjustments and they'll be better as well. I expect everybody's level will increase as the season goes on, but the Empire are still fitting in a bunch of new pieces. So when they kind of sort that out, in addition to adding back some potential injuries, I mean, they could have a bit more firepower, more punch. I mean, give Calvin Brown some more time to play with the rest of that offense and know which shots to take and which ones not to take. Maybe move John Randolph to offense more frequently, either 100% of the time, 75% of the time, whatever it is. I mean, he looked great on offense both days. He was moving very well. He was hard to cover. He's a good thrower. So maybe that's what that offense needs to unlock it a little bit. So yeah, that I think there are still a lot of positives. I mean, you played one of the better teams in the league to basically a draw, and here we are.
Yeah, I also liked I thought there was better pressure from the D line on the handlers of Boston than I had seen from the Empire in their first few games of the season. I felt like whether it was Sam Jonas especially or Auletta, just stuff where you don't get the D, but you put the likes of Ned Dick and with Marquez obviously on Ben Sadok. But I felt like there was more pressure than we're used to. And so at times, what I felt like with the Boston offense is we got to see kind of their plan B or plan C. And then I'm going to, at the very end, speak a little bit about the Boston-DC game, but very similar, where I think DC and the Empire are both kind of pushing Boston to show their hand early. And to that point, we know their personnel. And there's this world where if, again, Corona doesn't come down with the diss that he did, that's a very different game. And yeah, maybe the Empire can't come back from 4. A lot had to go their way too. But yeah, I like what I saw from them there.
Empire fans, it's that time of year again. The UFA season is here, and New York is offering season ticket packages at watchufa.com/empire. Packages include your general admission pass with merch perks and free unlimited popcorn, a disc, and a family pack so you can bring the whole household. Not to mention all season ticket passes include admission to all our away games as well. Just show your pass at the front gate.
Now, I think the bigger bummer was the next day against Montreal, where that then became kind of a must-win because now you're 2-2 on the season, and it becomes a must-win situation. But it was a 24-23 double overtime loss to Montreal. Lots of rain, natural grass with a lot of layouts. So the intensity of that game was kind of what the Empire would need it to be from the very beginning. But unlike in New York, when the Empire, they started to create separation in New York, but they held off Montreal. This time it didn't work out that way. In fact, New York actually came back from 2 to send it to overtime, and then obviously happens with the overtime play. So as we talked about the Calvin Brown turnovers late in that game, as I said, Oliver Fay, maybe this is another hot take for you. I think Oliver Fay might be, well, Calvin Brown probably. All right. Don't give half-baked ideas when you haven't fully thought them through and thought about the ideas. But I will say, at least on the defensive side of the disc, Oliver Fay is certainly the biggest pickup to me for the Empire this season. He's just around everywhere, taking on the huge matchups, making big plays. But unfortunately, he has his, we'll say bad moment this season. He couldn't get a throw off in overtime at the buzzer. Though, I think he thought he had more time, obviously.
He looked so distraught when I think he realized time expired. He was just like hands on head, like, oh no. Like I couldn't hear him, obviously, but I feel like he was saying, oh no, I didn't know.
Because there was Yacht in the back corner calling for it. And obviously
could have just thrown some garbage into the end zone and prayed. At least they would have taken a shot. Yeah.
Because obviously Montreal starts the second overtime on offense because the Empire started the first overtime on offense. And then that's it. So, yeah, I mean, there are other little notes. Like, I liked what I saw from Sam Alston. I think for Montreal, to their credit, we saw this in New York, and now you saw it up in Montreal. Christophe Tremblay-Jonca, healthy. And I spoke to the coaching staff from Montreal, too. They were really confident. They said, hey, we love Tobey. Like, we understand that he had to leave not because of us, but because of other things related to staying on his visa, things like that. So it wasn't bad blood as to why that separation occurred, but they said, hey, we like the fact that we like what our team is, and we like that we returned a lot of players, and consistently having your 20 does more for you than making sure you have your best player, your most talented player, because Tremblay-Jonca has now kind of become that guy, throwing this season and being healthy at 9 scores, 2 blocks, 4 hockey assists, over 550 total yards. Like, when we're talking about, there's all UFA, sure. But when you're talking about at least all East division, Tremblay-Jonca is clearly there and potentially going to, at least on paper, Montreal's record. I mean, who knows? But yeah, 1-3 is not going to get you an all UFA spot. But as far as an all East player, he's been one of the top 5, maybe top 3 players in the East division so far this year.
And you also previously called it a few weeks ago. Montreal's offense can absolutely punch with anybody. If they could just shore up what they can do defensively a little bit, I mean, they'd be right in the mix. They got the good win this weekend, but yeah, I mean, offensively, they're tough to slow down. They shoot deep pretty well at times, and they did a decent job picking their spots, and they just kind of played with a pace that suited them, and it seemed like they were just on the same page. The Empire offense at times looked like it was a little stagnant. They weren't all in sync. There were a bunch of points where they were great, and Calvin Brown's bouncing to John Randolph. They're doing some give and goes. They're moving. Rushmeyer Bailey's in the mix. Like, the three of them got a lot of touches and were moving the disc really well together. But there were times where you could tell everybody wasn't a complete unit that had has spent a ton of time together.
Well, last season we saw Liam Haverfield join the team, and again, always well wishes in his ACL recovery. And we saw that he was signed for the O-line. All talk was him offense, and then he gets moved over to the D-line. And that does kind of work as a big arm on the D-line. And it does seem like, this is me again talking without any other insider information, Max Shepard then on Saturday gets moved to the D-line against Montreal as a big thrower, as we see John Randolph play much more on the O-line. So I think what you're seeing, yes, is that the Empire want to be able to move the disc a little bit better on offense, especially in that backfield and middle space. And then you move Shepard to the D-line just so you have kind of a guide to say, all right, we don't even have to move the disc. We want to open up that game, because I think they wanted, that being the Empire, more long stuff for the D-line, like quicker breaks, as opposed to having to move it around as much as they do. Because Auletta does have a bit of an arm, but his game is much more in the small spaces than it is that big huck. His hucks come from power positions. I think that's what I'm getting to, that they wanted a player who could, from a standstill, throw that huck. The rest of the players who throw deep on the Empire D-line all do it from power position. And so they just wanted a guy who could put that disc up. And again, that is my glass half full as to the Shepard move. Yeah,
he definitely had a forgettable weekend. That was, I'd have to dig through Pittsburgh stats, which I'm probably not going to do anytime soon. I can't imagine he's had less of a statistical impact in a doubleheader weekend. He was kind of forgettable and not super useful in the Boston game. He had a few throwaways that were not great. and then he was like slowly getting shifted to the D line as the game progressed. And he did fine there. Nothing really to note, good or bad. It was okay. And then in the Montreal game, he played almost exclusively D line for the most part. And I made some notes as I was watching the game. Like, he did not play great defense. There were a few things where, it's going to be hard to draw a picture, but there were times where he was kind of playing lax D on somebody in the middle of the field. He lets them gain a lot of separation deep, and then he's like not really covering anybody or covering any dangerous space for like breakthrows or side things. And then next thing you know, his guy is going deep for a goal. And I don't know if he thought he was going to have help, but based on what I'm seeing from like the wide out view, it didn't really look like anybody was in a position to help. So that was kind of lazy. Then there was some other ones where he leaves a guy. This was Montreal eventually tied it at 19-19. He leaves a guy kind of wandering in the back right end zone, and then he's like kind of near the front of the goal line in the middle of the field, and then the guy just goes like all the way over and around, and he eventually scores the goal that they throw down the sideline to him. And again, like maybe some people could have picked up and helped, but they were busy covering other people, and he wasn't really blocking anything at the front of the end zone. Like, if there were a bunch of guys there, sure, let the throw go over the top and hopefully somebody can get it. But it didn't seem like he was moving to spaces to block anything dangerous or do anything super useful. Or, I didn't see him communicating with teammates like, hey, here or there, like, let's switch, let's do this. It did not look like he was playing with a lot of intensity. And then, like, he just got burned a bunch of times. And it on camera, it doesn't, if you don't look with a very keen eye, it doesn't necessarily look like he's the one getting burned because he's not even close. But really, it was his malaise about the whole thing that was like, that's where the goals came from. Just like him not trying very hard or not staying close or kind of not doing useful things. So, he's got to be more in touch with what the team is trying to do there, or just like take a little more personal responsibility for staying close. But yeah, I mean, I do in theory like the idea of maybe him helping marshal that D-line offense and being a dangerous release valve for them. I would love to see John Randolph and Max Shepard play some offense together. It seems like the team is using them as like for like, but they don't really have the same kind of play style. John Randolph's a little more frantic at times with like his cutting and his motions and all that stuff. Whereas Max Shepard is more like, pick a good spot, get there, get the disc, and now I can do a ton of things with it. And I feel like if you put them both together, maybe you would just have this like really nice flow of like the whole field becomes available and dangerous. So, I don't know if we'll get to see that, but personally, I would love to get a look at that.
Well, I think the Empire offense is also trying to load on the size. When you look at the size of that Boston D-line and Montreal D-line too. I mean, these D-lines.
Yeah. And Ever Shapiro played well.
Yeah.
So it's who are you going to replace? Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Is it Ollie, Chartok? Is it Yacht? Well, obviously not, but is it, Shapiro? Right. So yeah, one of those big bodies you take off. And again, Chartok, because of his comfortable nature around the disc, like he really is so much of a bailout. And so when you remove that element to it, you lose part of what makes you. I mean,
I feel like, I do feel like potentially Oliver Chartok would be easier to put on a D-line, and he's going to play good defense and offense, whereas Max Shepard looked not as comfortable in that defensive space. Maybe he just needs a little more time there. But
that's what I was going to say. As a player who consistently, again, obviously I'm not comparing myself in any way, but as a player for me, who, if I don't have trust behind me, like if I haven't had those reps on a D-line with people, like, again, this is just anecdotal, but as I'm going through the tryout process, like, I mean, you've played me for a long time. Like, if I trust the people around me and I know where we are, I am much better at defending space. I'm much better at my matchup and having the trust behind me to take the chances I need to. But when the trial process, I'm playing with new people, I kind of just try to stick to my person as much as I can. And then when I take those risks, they're much riskier, because then if there's no communication or no help or whatever it is. So to me, I'm, again, glass half full, is that if Shepard can get some practices in, and at this point in the season, though, there's no time to kind of work things out. I almost feel for some of the back of the roster this season because, too, there's no real game to say, all right, we're going to put you into this game, because every game now is must win. Every game is, hey, we need best 20. Every game is, we have to trust fully the players that are on the field are ones who've practiced together and have put those reps in together. So we can't just have, another extra person thrown in there. So my heart does go back to the bottom of the roster at this point, because I don't know how many minutes or how much they're going to see the field throughout the remainder of this year. But for me, for Shepard, I'm just trying to hope that some reps defensively are going to smooth things out. We also, I'm not going to say exactly who, but I already know that there are a few players offensively who are missing against the Phoenix. So I would actually kind of expect and hedge my bet that Shepard may be back on O-line against the Phoenix. And he did really well against them in the preseason game at Newman University, where they did add the 2 Grossberg. So that's kind of the last piece of this, is to preview that. But before we do that, I want to give a big idea about the division and what these 2 losses do mean. Because, with the Phoenix, we're off this weekend. They're 3-0. But meanwhile, it was a 14-12 win for Boston over DC. And I know that's 2, but that was a much larger margin than 2, having watched that game too. And DC late did force Boston to kind of go into their bag. So in the last 3-4 minutes, when the game was kind of getting pressurized, Boston did give you the Jeff Babbitt constantly around the disc variation until that was called a timeout. But that means Boston were willing to waste a minute and a half or 2 minutes off the clock just by getting Babbitt around the disc and taking as much time as they could with as many throws. So that's kind of what Boston wanted to do. And then eventually you can't do that forever. So they took a timeout, and then the offense wound up finishing that game for Boston. But for DC, they're sitting at 2-2 as well. So New York 2-3, DC still have Boston twice, plus New York twice, and they're at 2-2.
Yeah.
And so
that's
Philly, why. Yeah, and then Philly at 3-0. So it looks like, yes, Boston at 4-0, and yes, Philly's undefeated until New York can potentially for them, well, hopefully for them, can take them down this weekend. But Philly will also be again playing on the road. I mean, not on the road. They're playing at home, but it's college nationals as well. And I guess, fortunately, unfortunately for them, Georgia Tech did not make nationals, which means that Sam Grossberg and Adam Grossberg from Georgia Tech are available, because Sam Grossberg is a teenager, and he has been their most important player, I think, to get them to 3-0 outside of Scott Heyman and Sean Mott, who we talked about before. Scott Heyman playing like a superstar, an all East Division player, maybe all UFA player at this point. And then Sean Mott has been the efficient Sean Mott that we know and love, not the turnover-prone Sean Mott. And then Nate Little has also taken on those big matchups and has been the guy that we were kind of expecting, but he hasn't really been available in previous seasons, but he's now available. And Nate Little he's being that guy. He's being that defensive number one option that you can expect him to be. So there's a lot of moving parts for Philly, sure. But at this point, it looks like Philly, New York, DC, Boston, and Montreal kept themselves alive with that 1-3 record. But I mean, for New York, I still like their path in, but now all eyes, of course, they have to beat Philly and DC. Everything comes down to that, because the winner of those matchups is going to make the postseason. We know that.
Boston did New York a huge favor by beating DC, because it keeps everything, it keeps most of the division closely clumped together. And if New York can just beat DC 1 or 2 times, great. You're probably in a good position. If they can take care of Philadelphia, same thing, great, good position. And, Philly is 3-0, sure. I do not want to take anything away from them. They beat DC. They look pretty decent. And they're always like a punchy team. They're always giving better teams in the division a hard time. So you cannot take them lightly at all. And this, for all we know, this could be their season where they finally put it all together and they make the playoffs and they have a good run. But 2 wins against Toronto and 1 super tight game against DC, if Empire can take care of business and beat them, there's a very good chance Philly falls kind of back towards the clump and the middle of the division, and everything kind of works out, and Empire can be in a totally fine position. They'll be in one of those playoff spots at the end of the season. I think the path is there. Philly also has a pretty tough schedule. They play DC, Empire twice, Boston, Carolina. So it is not an easy schedule for them moving forward. They kind of started with the 2 potentially easier games against Toronto, even though Toronto is also probably a little better this year.
Yeah, I mean, Toronto, I'll say about DC, having watched them against Toronto, watching them against Boston, I like the fact that, Toronto looked good against DC. They were missing pieces, and DC kind of had their players, and Toronto pushed them at times. And I think Toronto was a bit too helter-skelter, and not as organized. They looked like they were kind of trying to readjust their chemistry again. But if I'm DC, I'm thinking about the Toronto game, and I'm saying, hey, if that game had happened in 8 weeks from now, we might have lost that game. But DC clearly had enough. But then against Boston, when we talk about some of the pieces for New York trying to fit in and learn each other, I'm a little bit worried if I'm DC, because while having watched that game against Boston and the game against Toronto, this is faces that we know and recognize. And yet there's just something a little bit off about what DC are trying to do. I think teams without, to that point, without Johnny Malks, DC is very much still, it's a little more vertical than it was in the past with Johnny Malks, but they're still a very similar style. And I think Christian Boxley playing the way he does, it does allow you a lot of break throws. You're just around the disc and you're able to complete a lot of completions. But I think DC's offense is right now struggling with that verticality. They're putting a lot of onus on Kevin Healy to be that guy. And I'm not saying that Kevin Healy, because he has been in the past, there are moments, but there's a lot of, we need Kevin Healy to stretch the field and make some plays throughout the game if we're going to get enough deep looks in these contests. And
small ball works really well when it's going great and the conditions are right and everybody's on the same page and you don't have any mistakes. But when teams are playing really hard and the pressure's there, it is a lot of extra passes, and every single extra pass is a chance for a mistake, even if it's just a silly little drop or just to obviously blocks can happen, but just all those extra passes can add up to the chance for a mistake. And sometimes that has come back to bite DC, because even though when they've been a really great team, it's like, okay, yeah, you completed 100 extra passes than us, but mixed in there were also 2 extra turnovers. And that's all we needed. Those were the breaks we needed to win the game. So, it's dicey.
Yeah, then even defensively, I think DC is kind of the same DC defense of the past, where they can take it away, but without, I don't think David Bloodgood played this weekend. I think he was unavailable, but without him, I thought they weren't really moving the disc defensively as well as they would have liked. And DC does really pride themselves on getting breaks through their D-line movement. And if they're not getting those breaks, then obviously you got to take the time out, and then you got to put the offense back on the field. And to me, there were times in that game with Boston, their defense was just deeper defensively, than Boston's was. And so you had longer O points that they had to fight for. There was one really good stand by the DC D-line. It took like 2.5 minutes off the clock of Boston's O-line. You felt like they ran him down. But then Boston's O-line, I think they held at that point, and then they wound up, next time they were on O, they put kind of a hybrid line on. I think it was McCann or Rackle-Linehan, whoever it was. And because you have Tanner Johnson go, you have these break glass case of emergency defensive players who can easily fit into your offense if you're Boston. And to me, in that game, Boston just felt deeper. DC just couldn't make that run because Boston just had more horses. And as I said, it's obviously the New York Empire podcast, so I'm obviously telling you that I would be more worried if I was a DC fan than an Empire fan making the postseason. And obviously, we know that Philly's schedule is really tough. So for then just breaking it down for New York, they've got Philly on Friday at 7 p.m. at Newman University. Then it's Toronto on June the 1st on the road. DC down in DC on June the 6th, and then finally returning home on June the 14th to host DC before finishing with 3 more home games, Toronto, Philly, and Boston. So with all this time, the Empire also been out on the road. They've had just 1 home game, a win against Montreal. To be 2-3, it's not what you want. Or to be 1-3, I should say, on the road isn't what you want. But there's some home cooking that the Empire are preparing for coming up. And it is best. As trite as it sounds, you've got to win in front of your home fans. And if you don't win, and that's what I said to bookend this show with the Empire, if they don't win in front of their home fans, then they're not going to make the postseason. But if they do make the postseason,
at this point,
exactly, they do make the postseason, and they should have done it in front of their home fans, then they're as good as anybody in the league. Because again, I'm also watching other teams, like what Chicago just did to Minnesota, I think said more about how Minnesota is not returning as a favorite right now, at least through that one game against Chicago. Chicago didn't look like an all-conquering side. They just looked like the better team against Minnesota in a disgusting windy game. And I think that's also been one of the elements throughout this season that we've seen. Even Oregon taking down Seattle as well. That was the shock win over the weekend, I thought, too. And so we're just seeing so many results, I feel like, where the wind and the weather, like Colorado.
The Havoc got their win, too.
Yeah.
Don't
Houston
leave them out. Yeah.
Houston being Colorado in their first win that against a team that's not named Dallas. Right. And so, there are so many upsets and so many things going around the league. And I don't know what it is. I think, is it parity? Or, as I said, I'm watching these games and I'm like, man, I don't want to throw in that. If this is what these guys are doing, like they're just.
I love the weather.
It's been a lot of ugly spring, windy ultimate so far.
Yeah, and that's why it's not time to panic if you're an Empire player, coach, fan. There's time. The season gets late quick with how short the season is and how few the games are, but I think things are well within their control. And again, I watched the games and I was never at any point. I mean, there was a specific point or two where I was like, oh, the offense is a little stagnant, or the cutters are too far away, or the reset communication wasn't great. But it's like Calvin Brown's first few games here, like that kind of thing. But like there was nothing I was watching where I was just like, oh, this isn't gonna go well. This is bad. This is not good. Like there was none of that, and I felt that way a few times last year when they were playing, and they ultimately fell short, but. No, this feels like a pretty good team with some decent depth and some good new players. And I think they just need to figure it out. And if they can put it all together at the right time, quick enough, yeah, they'll lost an AirPod. I think they'll be fine.
But there's also going to be practices too. A reminder that the Empire have already played 5 games and Chicago and Detroit have played 1 game so far this season. So there is still practices and time to kind of work things out behind the scenes. But yeah, looking up and down the league, sure, Boston's 4-0, but unless I'm Oakland or especially Atlanta Hustle, who right now the Atlanta Hustle look like the UFA champions, or at least like it's going to go through Atlanta, but they've also never been to the postseason. So you don't count your chickens before they hatch, things happen. But yeah, if I'm not one of those 2 teams, even with the Glory and the Soul at 4-0, it's a wide open league, and that's good for all the parity in that. But yes, the Empire, I think, still have as good a top 9 or 10 as any other team in the league when you stack up, okay, those are not say universe line, kill line, whatever you want to call them. Like I think the Empire 10, 11 deep are as deep or deeper than every other team in the league. And I think that creates parity, and that's what you got. So
yeah,
I think that's
it for us. Sorry, I had one more quick point. I just wanted to say massive props to Matt Cat Stevens for not blowing a gasket when the officials were telling him at the end of the Boston game that was a clean foul and that was basically a done deal. Your team has lost. If that was me in that situation and I was hearing incidental contact and stuff, I mean, Cat was standing there and he kind of did this, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But then it seemed like he just walked away calmly. I don't know. I would have had to been thrown in jail. I think I would have lost it.
I mean, that's why
the composure from the coaching staff in this situation was it was good stuff. I would have certainly gotten the technical, whatever they're calling some of these fouls nowadays. Yeah, it wouldn't have been good.
Yeah, I mean, that's why if you ever join a coaching staff, we can't send you north of the border because we want to make sure we can bring you back. That's kind of the problem. So. All right. So again, it's Friday, the Empire at the Phoenix at 7 p.m. at Newman University. Again, that's Toronto, DC. So still the road tripping continues, but they finally return home on June the 14th to host the DC Breeze. So make sure you get your tickets early for that one. And for Matt, Pippin, Auletta, I'm Dan Hilton. Everybody, again, we'll see you next time at Joseph Evasina Field or at Memorial in Mount Vernon. But yeah, for the whole Empire family, talk to you soon.